Just clicked it, but I will do that as well.
Okay.
There we go. Welcome, everyone. We're just waiting for people to file in, so thank you for your patience. Okay, thank you for joining us today. My name is Sarah Beth Laurie. I'm a faculty member on the Seattle campus, and I've been at Antioch. I started a doctoral program in 2004 and graduated from Antioch with a second master's degree and my doctorate. So I am very invested in this community, and I'm really grateful to all the alumni who've been involved in these talks and who are bringing these messy conversations into the classroom and caring what happens here even after they graduate. So in that spirit, I'd like to introduce our conversationalists for today and give you a little bit of their background. Our conversation is called Parenting in a Racist Context. And I invited Anthony Pennant, who works here in our Seattle campus in the Marriage and Family program, where he's a faculty member and a licensed marriage and family therapist and approved supervisor. He is currently a second-year PhD student in the Marriage and Family Therapy program at Antioch, New England, and is a full-time faculty in the Couple and Family Therapy Department at Antioch University Seattle. He has extensive experience working with individuals, couples, and families, including neurodiversity and children. And in addition to his work with family, he has served on various nonprofit organizations, including the Mnuchin Center for the Family, as well as the Washington Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, serving as the incoming president-elect. At this time, he maintains a private practice in Seattle, supporting people of color, transracial families, and children with special needs and their families. Our second conversationalist is Carmela, or Dr. Max, as we call her lovingly. Maxell, she obtained her doctorate at Antioch, Seattle, in clinical psychology, and has been working with children and families in behavioral health for over a decade across the United States. She has done a majority of work in the state of Washington with underserved families and at-risk youth, as well as individuals who receive primary care services. Max obtained her BA in psychology from the University of Michigan Dearborn and worked as a special education paraprofessional there prior to beginning her graduate studies at the University of Detroit in 2010 and received her MA in clinical psychology in 2012. She works as a senior faculty lecturer for our program here, the undergraduate program, and part-time faculty for Antioch and Seattle Central College, teaching master's and BA students in mental health counseling, sociology, and health services. She also works as an MHP for the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office. She utilizes an integrative collaborative approach to therapy with an emphasis on
Sarah Beth, you're muted.
I've been muted this whole time.
No, just
Okay.
the last,
Okay.
the last sentence or two.
Okay. Thank goodness. Sorry, folks. Max is doing great work, in case you missed all that. She works for the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office. I don't know if you got that part. But she works developing treatment plans and solutions with her clients and integrates culturally sound recommendations for parenting assessments and other services for underserved communities and people of color. She is a mother of four and an advocate for families in Snohomish County. And finally, Ahmad Bennett is also the third alum in this group at our program in undergraduate studies. And he's currently a marriage and family therapist intern working at Valley City's behavioral health at Rainier Beach in Seattle. He's working toward the completion of his MA degree in marriage and family therapy here at Antioch. His theoretical orientation is based on family systems theory, cognitive behavioral theory, emotionally focused therapy, motivational interviewing, active listening, and play therapy for children and adolescents. His goal is to support all family dimensions in increasing better communication, emotional supports, and supporting family members during transitions and changes to the family system. He trained in working with children 5 to 17 years of age in the areas that affect childhood development. He's also a Navy veteran and has served in many capacities as a former homeless case manager with Catholic Community Services and the YWCA, a military veteran employment specialist with King and Snohomish counties. He also works in higher education by managing the veteran program at Lake Washington University, or Institute of Technology, in Kirkland, Washington. He believes in supporting veterans, spouses, and children of members served in the armed services and supporting all families. He's been married for 15 years and is the father of 5 amazing daughters and a grandparent to 2 outstanding grandchildren. Welcome to you 3 and to all of you here today. So we'll start off. Please make sure that you put yourself on mute, not like me during my talk. And also, if you have questions while the first round of conversation is happening, feel free to put those in the chat. I think that is where we'll start today. So please begin your conversation. Thank you for being here.
I just want to just take a second to kick this off. And first, tell everybody thank you for spending some time and sitting with this conversation. And thank you to my fellow colleagues for having this conversation. So I think I want to just kind of start this off on what it's like to be African-American or Black American in the Pacific Northwest. This is a very unique and beautiful place that we live in. I think physically and, with the environment, but it's also, we're regimented to our own processes. It's a little different than the rest of the United States. So I wanted to open it up to my colleagues. What was it like moving to the Northwest and kind of talk about that? And I just wanted to open up to anybody who wants to take a stab at it.
I will definitely take a stab at that. So prior to this, Ahmad, you had mentioned coming from the East Coast. I'm also an East Coast native myself. And the pacing of life is very different here than I'm used to. Very passive aggressive, probably more passive than I'm used to. People are a lot more relaxed in the way they converse with one another, their dealings in everyday life. And on the East Coast, it is very much about go, 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 go. So one of the things I've come to appreciate about living in the Pacific Northwest is that idea of integrating self-care in a very different way. And as we talk about being parents, and being parents of color, specifically in this time, it is something that is quite crucial. Understanding how to take care of yourself and put yourself first, bringing back the I into the conversation as we talk about, being responsible for the future generations that we are, we are entrusted with.
I love that we're all from the East Coast originally. I also would like to thank everyone else for being here and listening to us talk today. It is quite an honor that anytime that I can get up in front of someone and you all want to hear about me or my colleagues say something. So I appreciate that very much so. Yes, I am originally from Connecticut, eastern part of the States. Very much a hustle and bustle, very much also very, to a point, a little cold, but that's part of Connecticut's charm, if you will. But I will say one funny thing and maybe a serious thing. The thing that was different for me moving here was the pizza. I still have not been able to find a good East Coast pizza. I'm sorry. It's just not everywhere up and down the West Coast. I'm sorry. It is what it is. I'm still grieving. I am still grieving that. But I think that one thing that was a little difficult for me is I remember I was teaching at Antioch one day, and I was getting ready to leave and someone was coming in delivering food. And it was what I would perceive to be an African-American gentleman who was like, hey, how you doing? He gave me like this eye contact, was like totally engaged with me. And like, this is shortly after I had moved here. And I was like, I don't know this dude. Like, did I owe him money? Did I see him before? Did he see me on a video someplace? Like where? And I began to understand that like, at that particular point that like eye contact and connection was a huge thing for people of color in this city, specifically for African Americans, that like it was this like, I see you, you see me, this is this like joint conversation that we're gonna have to create safety in these like little micro conversations that we would have. And for me, I think that was a big part, right, of like almost like being seen, but almost to a point being protected also, right? Like that, like if that like being able to have that conversation with someone who looked like me was like really important. And you know, back east, it's a little easier to find necessarily more people back and forth like that look like me, and we'll have like direct conversation, right? Because I was from Philly before moving here, but it's different. And so I like that question, Ahmad. Thank you.
I just want to respond to you, Anthony. My partner and I are sitting here chuckling because I had said this before, that it has been very difficult to find good pizza around here. Nothing mirrors the East Coast. And I think food is a huge part of our culture too, just, you know, as East Coast folks, and then also as just as Black individuals, food is something that brings us together. And so as you talk about those micro conversations and just those, I don't know, those micro, I don't know, interactions, what have you, those little things are things that we miss, right? You know, things that are unsaid, unstated, you know, on the East Coast, things that we've somehow brought here, but we have to dig for, we have to find a little more differently. So it's a little more difficult. And as we dive into the conversation about parenting, you know, I think I've found myself in situations where those pieces of the eye contact, you know, the way we converse with one another has been extremely important in, you know, feeling just even safe as a parent here, as a person of color. So, you know, I'll open it up to the both of you to talk about that, but it has definitely been a very interesting experience trying to parent out here with such a very aggressive background and just sort of reflecting on my time here. I think this place has definitely shaped me into a very different individual.
Ahmad, can you give a little, I will give some deference to you and Dr. Max first around like parenting actually in the racial context, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's been an education for me. My wife, she's Caucasian. So we met and served together in the military. Literally, we served on the same combat ship, doing the same job. So that was the only kind of trust. I had to actually look at my relationships, and I think I've never dated a civilian before. And I think it comes down to something about safety for me. Like, I need you to know how to handle a gun and do stuff. So just caveat to deciding to stay here when I got out of the military, when you start having kids, it was different because I have to import my cultural identity here. I have to like when we talk about food, you know, and just music. I'm really big about the narrative story of documenting my family's history, a little for me, but more for my kids, because I'm so far removed from everything. My aunts and my cousins aren't there to do their hair. You know, I have all 5 girls. So when it's not just doing the hair, it's about those identities and stories that get passed when your hair is getting done, is what that represents. Cooking with grandma, cooking with mom in the kitchen. It's more than just preparing a meal. It's building on history and traditions and stories that mom's not here anymore, or mom doesn't live here. So I have to do a little extra effort as a father. Not only as, you know, I want to raise my girls as safe and healthy as we can, but then also being specifically aware of their identity and understand that your hair is beautiful and you don't need to chew anything to it, or just being comfortable in your own skin. And then we have the situations where our somebody's picking on my kids, I have to ask that question. Is this a kid thing or is this something else? That's where my mind goes to. And that's something where I always have to constantly have to kind of be very aware of that. So that's just a little bit about what it's like. It's just making sure I feel like I have to import my identity because it's not represented in my community on the normal day-to-day kind of stuff.
You know, I definitely mirror a lot of that sentiment. And what's very interesting is just kind of the play off here with you being a Black male and me being a self-identified Black female. And I say self-identified because I'm multiracial. So primarily Black, and then my mother is Filipino. So I grew up, on the East Coast, being biracial and not being understood very well. I was an enigma of the time. Several questions about hair and about mannerisms, and because it was such a mix, right? So I have that very, that iron fist Black mama aspect of me. And then I have that very quiet, subdued Asian or Pacific Islander aspect that I've incorporated into my parenting. And and like you, my partner's white as well. And so it's a constant educational series, I think, going on in our household. We're constantly learning from one another. It's difficult. It's exciting. It's scary. The idea of safety is something that I am constantly battling with, because I've grown up in, being the person that I am, not ever really feeling safe. As a female, constantly having to look over my shoulder for one reason or another. As a Black female, constantly being told that I'm intimidating. And then, to be biracial, then there's that other concept of we don't understand who you are, and we had a difficult time understanding your Blackness anyway. So incorporating that into my parenting as a biracial parent, raising biracial kids, it's really hard. I constantly feel that need to educate, and I don't really know if it's a need, but rather it's society's placing its agenda on me to currently or constantly have to explain myself and the reasons for why I do what I do. It's aggravating as hell. It's aggravating, and I constantly get questioned about it, especially by my white counterparts, and it's, in their minds, there's this dichotomy, right, of right and wrong. But, a lot of us live in that blur. We live in that gray area of, what might seem right to you doesn't work for our people, doesn't work for what we do. And it's just this constant battle, a constant, shifting or recalibrating to try and fit in, but also preserve that sense of culture. And it is exhausting.
I thank you both for sharing what you just shared. Although I am not a parent, I understand exactly what you're talking about, Dr. Max, around the multi-ethnic, multiracial, identities and formation and things about, like, almost like having to choose, but that's part of what happens with, like, that, well, you don't look this or you don't look that, or this is the way you should do, or if you're not this enough, then you can't claim the mantle of this particular color, which is, like, aggravating, right? I'll speak just briefly, like, therapeutically. Some of the families that I see a lot of white families that have adopted children of color, which I think is a wonderful thing. But I think that it should be, like, as it relates back to this topic, right? Like, there's an identity of the family, right? Which can be the family look, the last name, maybe the culture of the family. This is what we do on certain days and things like that. But then it also is the identity of the child, right? And so I work with parents to be able to understand that they will have a limitation, which, I'm not a parent, but I see this all the time. Parents do a good job most of the time, right, of trying to be there for their kids. But acknowledging a limitation is not something that, like, parents like, right? Talk to any parent with a teenager, right? They're not gonna like that they're not number one in that kid's life at that moment. But I would say, like, when you are raising a child who is not the same race as you, right? You will be limited in what you're able to talk to them about. And some of my work has been around, like, teaching white parents how to have conversation around race with themselves, between each other, and with their kid. And I'm working with one particular family right now who's doing a really good job of, like, just saying, like, you know what? I don't know what that's like. let's go talk to Anthony about this, right? Or, you know what, we're going to connect you with this particular place because they were this family was adopted a child from Congo. Like they're connected to a Congolese like community, right? That infuses culture that's central to the child for them to be able to identify and to formulate like who they are racially, right? And which is really, really important. And that really helps like conversation, right? That helps them being able to feel safe. That helps them being able to be open. That helps them to be able to advocate for their children in school, which is a big thing, you know, because sometimes if you look at different people of color, that they present very differently mental health things than some other white counterparts might. And so, you know, educating families to be aware of this is really, really important.
I really appreciate what you said. Just a few things I was thinking about, having conversations with my white counterparts and, you know, teaching children how to advocate for themselves. I think that's also an uphill battle as well, because advocacy for our, you know, for our community does not look the same and is not welcomed in the same manner as, you know, people of other, you know, races and backgrounds. And it's just the sheer, you know, hard reality of it. And trying to have these conversations with a lot of my white counterparts sometimes is, you know, it just goes awry. People end up getting their feelings hurt. I feel extremely defeated. And it becomes, no, if you would just try harder, or if you realize that, you know, everybody from every single race has dealt with turbulence and yada, yada, yada. But this is not the conversation that we're having right now. You know, we're having this conversation about this particular group, and this is what you need to be mindful of. So being mindful of how you even explicate, right, your own experiences, because people want to sit there and tell you that your experiences are wrong. As a parent, as a Black person in society, as a professional, you know, there's this constant scrutiny about what you know versus what you don't know. The number of degrees that you have doesn't make you better, doesn't make you smarter. You should know better. You should know how to advocate. If you advocated in this particular way, it would yield the same results. And that is, you know, historically untrue. And I find myself with having this constant internal battle with how do I explain to my counterparts that, you know, the way that you are going about, you know, speaking to teachers or speaking to the community about what your family or what your children's particular needs are is not going to yield me the same results. I've used this word before, it's aggravating, it's frustrating. It's also, it's very moot, you know, it's not going to go anywhere in the same way. And yet and still we continue to go back and we continue to, you know, to line ourselves up in front of the fire squad and continue to get shot down just to get back up and do it all over again, because our level of resiliency, you know, was not born overnight. It was through, you know, trauma and, you know, slavery and indentured servitude and, you know, a series of historical atrocities that have brought us to this particular, you know, time frame. And I don't think that that's something that's going to go away very easily.
I would have to agree. It's funny, my family, I don't know about the rest of you, but 2020 has been kind of a crazy year in this house. And with that being said, I have a brother-in-law that I've known since he was in high school. I watched this kid graduate. I was there at his last football game as a senior in high school and seen him join the military and do all these things. And then this election came up and we were on different sides of political beliefs. So can I just tell you how Easter was very interesting at our house? Because they saw a side of Ahmad that I didn't feel he didn't need to show up, but this guy, he needed to show up and he had to make some specific points. And, you know, and I've come to this belief now where I don't start finding the truth until we start getting uncomfortable. Never in my life has anyone ever asked me, Ahmad, I need you to tell the truth. Is that a comfortable situation? And so I had to make him very uncomfortable and challenge his mindset. Not because I think it was wrong or anything like that. For him, I think everyone should have their beliefs, let's just say that. But the fact that I had to teach him on who I am, and you've known me for I don't know, 3/4 of your life, and you still don't know me like I thought you did. That's what 2020 brought out for me is I had to do some serious education. I had to do some house cleaning, and I had to ask people, what's your intent? We can all disagree on this, that, and the third, but what's your intent? That's been the word for me for 2020's intent. So as a parent, when I step out into spaces, we talked before we started, I have to do things to prepare myself so I'm most successful. So I code switch. So if those of you who don't know what code switching is, I probably sound very Caucasian right now, but I can guarantee you when this Zoom session is not going on, my vernacular will be a little different and how I carry myself is going to be a little different, but I have to be professional if I expect to get to what I need to get done for myself, right? So that's what you got to do. I refuse to code switch as a parent though. And so when I go to schools and I have to advocate for my Black children, you're going to have to see me culturally. And if you don't have that cultural, I guess, complexity for whatever we're dealing with, then we're going to have a conversation before we can even talk about my kid. That's the extra work I got to do. I feel like every time I go to some place, I got to bring a backpack of everything about myself to make sure that we understand that I'm just a little bit different, not better than anybody, just different. And how my approach is going to be different, how I'm seen. I wish I could tell you guys sometimes what it's like just to go out in the world sometimes. If those of you may see me, I'm not a small guy. And you should see how people who don't know me, how they physically react, because I'm all about body language. That's the one thing fighting in a war zone. You read people's body language before things pop off. Well, that's actually this Baltimore. You read body language before things pop off, and that's how you stay alive. And so when I walk through the spaces and people don't know me, and you can see the body language tense up, I see it. I don't react to it, but I feel it. And then I also know when I come to certain places, I have to carry myself differently if I expect to succeed and disarm other people around me. And that takes a lot of work. And so sometimes when I moved out here in the Pacific Northwest, just from a parenting perspective, going to Fred Meyer, I don't care what it's doing, I have to carry myself in a way where I cannot always be my true and authentic self, just because of where I'm at physically. And so that's some of the things I think we have to navigate as people or Black people and people of color. Those are the things we have to navigate is what are you bringing to work? If you're a woman and you work in a male-dominated place, what are you bringing to work? If you're a Black woman and working in a place, what are you bringing to work? It's all the stuff that we all have to bring to work. And that's what I realized living here. That was an unspoken rule. I had to do a lot of work just around me and just being comfortable in my skin. And that was something I didn't learn from home, unfortunately. My family, we weren't always in the position to have Maslow's hierarchy of needs at our direct fingertips. We're just trying to get those bills paid week to week to week. My mom and dad are both working really hard, but one of my parents is an alcoholic and this, that, and the third, and all the other things that all the families have to deal with. That was my training ground. And then I have to come here and I have to relearn to carry myself differently because I noticed it's a challenge.
I really like that, Ahmad, Dr. Max, all that you all have said that. I will say though that I'll say two things real quick. I think the first thing is that like, it is a challenge. Everything that you all have just described as a challenge, the constant like explaining or showing up in a way to like show your math, like this is the way that we operate. This is normal how we operate, right? And so like that is aggravating and just tiring, I would say. That's like, it's just this constant thing on repeat that happens all the time. And there's a level of trauma that happens with that, specifically with people of color, that they have to explain about the foods that they eat is okay, right? Like, or, you know, the spices that they may use is okay, right? Or the spices that they don't use are okay. Like all those things just very tiring to have those conversations over and over again. For me, Ahmad, I hear what you're saying too around having to like prepare to walk into spaces. Sometimes I just don't care anymore. I'm just not going to do it because I think James Baldwin has a quote around this, but like I want the world to reckon with me, not for me to reckon with the world. And so that's just what it is for me now. And I've been teaching a lot of my families to kind of like encounter each other in the world in that particular way, that not that you have to go in and show your math anymore. It's about like, do you want to understand me? Like, do you have an intent, like Ahmad was saying, to get who I am? You do? Okay, let's talk, right? I'm not going to bend over backwards anymore because that's just too much energy. And I think that that in a way like feeds into this supremacy, right? And this of oppression of like, I need to explain myself or who I am because I am less than. Yeah, I'm not interested in having that conversation anymore. So that's something that's been newer around that push that that for me, I can't be complicit around just doing that same thing over and over again. And if you really have a will to want to like do something different and be different and to expand your mind on what's going on, you'll get down with it, right? And that is fine, because that's some energy I can put some stuff behind, right? I see that you want to actually do this work. I see that you actually want to see who I am. Therefore, I will engage in conversation with you. If we're doing the same dance as we do before, no, thank you. And that's not aside, that's not, I mean, the Pacific Northwest, like I love it here. And I get it. Like people are super introverted. People will like look you in the face and like, you know, peace out. And I don't necessarily take that as like an affront on like racism or anything like that, or a judgment of who I am. I think that's just like personality wise, like that's how people get down, right? Like up here anyway. If it was California, like I would expect a little different, because that's not how everyone does in California. But what you were saying, Ahmad, I just wanted to tail end a little differently around how I'm choosing to go about being, because I'm just tired of being tired around that.
I am right there with you, Anthony, just tired of being tired. If I can get that tattooed across my forehead, I'm on it. You know, I just personally feel this need to preserve, and then also this need to educate. And I think this is what I grapple with on a daily basis. You know, this idea that when you decide you want to come to the table and learn about me, then let's roll. My issue with that is I've learned very quickly that there are so many people that are really not all that interested in learning about me, because they get uncomfortable and then they get emotional. And then, you know, it becomes this contest of my life versus yours. And I said, once again, I go back to, this is not what this conversation is about. You know, you've asked me about my upbringing, my experience. You want to know what it's like to be a Black woman in this body. I'm telling you what this is like. This is not up for discussion. This is not up for comparison. This is what it is. And outside of being tired, I find myself angry, very angry. You know, as the Black female, we are known as, you know, the neck of the family. You know, we are the ones, because of historical, you know, incarceration of our Black men, and because of a lot of the trials and tribulations that they have had to face, we have had to be the backbone, you know, as mothers and fathers for our family. And it is unfair in so many ways, and we have learned how to do so by the grace of God. You know, in that token, we are, you know, mistreated. We are not revered in the same way as our white female counterparts. You know, I believe there was an article that I read only a few short years ago that spoke about how Black women in this country are the most devalued women in the United States, that they're seen as ugly, not worth, you know, the same amount as their white counterparts. And I just found myself getting angrier and angrier. And it doesn't matter what letters I have behind my name, what I have to bring to the table. You look at me and you see me differently, and that's the end of that conversation. I can get nowhere with you. And so as a parent, it's equally as frustrating, because like I said, you know, I have multiracial kids. So stepping out into the world with a child that doesn't look, you know, like me, that's not pigmented like me, I often get questioned, and you wouldn't believe, even here in the Pacific Northwest, the liberal Pacific Northwest, I have been asked if these children are, you know, under my care as a caregiver. Basically, am I the help? And outside of a few choice words that I will not utter here, no, you know, these are my biological children. This is not up for you to, you know, have any kind of opinion about. I could have sworn the loving case actually, you know, got us to where we needed to be today. And this is the end of that discussion. And as a parent, as a professional, as a person, it hurts on all fronts because, you know, we talk about being versus doing, and you won't let me be, so I try to do. And no matter what I do, you won't let me be. And it just, I think it's just this horrendous cycle that doesn't seem to find any kind of closure. And quite honestly, you don't know who you can trust to even have those vulnerable conversations with, because, you know, that can come back to backfire as well. So there's so many moving parts, even with this conversation. It's, you know, it's both triggering and enlightening. And I think it's something that we need to continue to, you know, to work on. People need to continue to feel uncomfortable.
Thank you so much, Dr. Max and Anthony and Ahmad, for delving into your own personal experience and sharing that with us. I would like to ask Clarence if you would like to bring up your question. He's asking about teaching African-American culture beyond school and home in Seattle. Is that still the question, Clarence, or is there,
Well,
would you like to add to it?
I apologize. You know, I'm addicted to messy conversations at this point.
Oh, great.
I'm a little infirm today, which is why I mistyped in the chat. So what my question really was, based on my own, I've never been to Seattle. I'm looking forward to visiting your community. I'm looking forward to visiting the Antioch campus there. But my question was simply, I've had a friend who left the LA area, who moved there. Her husband got a great job at Microsoft. Their child was in a great private school. But she said that on the weekends, come Saturday morning, she would rush her child to the Black neighborhood, making sure that she got exposure to the Black community, because she was so afraid that culturally she would be, you know, at a deficit there. So my question simply was, how do you, those of you who have biracial children that have Black blood, how do you expose them culturally beyond school and your home in Seattle? I mean, like I said, I don't have a full knowledge, but that is what my friend's experience was.
Well, I can speak for myself and my family. I have an extensive circle of friends that are Black people, Black Americans here in Snohomish County, where I can get together with, and we have regular social, well, before COVID anyway, we would have regular social get-togethers where they were exposed to my kids were exposed to, I guess what you call traditional Black family of mom, dad, and all the activities that happen inside. I know my wife, she goes out of her way to find things to take the kids to, events, museums, anything with Black culture, and especially they represent Black women. Especially like getting their hair done. You know, she'll drive down to King or take the girls down to where people actually get their hair done regularly, and they can treat it and teach her how to do it. So it just requires a little extra work. You have to find your tribe. And it's taken me over 20 years to kind of develop and build my tribe of different diversity and people that I want my kids exposed to. So that's just kind of our experience.
I think very slowly is how you do that. Slow exposure, because it's overwhelming as an adult. So for a small child who is seeing the world through, in a way, a very rosy colored lens, you know, what I don't want to do is traumatize my children too early. And at the same time, they need to understand the realities of their own existence, that just by simply walking into a room, they're going to be conceived as a threat or something that is different. And they will feel that, and they might not be able to put words to that. So for me, you know, it's keeping a close knit with, like you said, you know, with our kin. So, you know, I call back home to my folks and, you know, my siblings. You know, I have a circle of friends here that are very diverse, and I keep it that way so that they understand that it's okay to have an inner circle that doesn't look like you, and it's okay to also have, you know, a circle that looks like you as well. And I constantly try, especially with my eldest, to open up that doorway to have that conversation, or those difficult, messy conversations about race and what he is experiencing, and allow those emotions to pour out. So very slowly over time.
Thank you so much. David Tripp has a question about trauma. David?
Yeah, first, thank you all for the conversation so far. I really appreciate it. As I'm listening to you, I kept thinking about just all the racial trauma and how does that play out in trying to either work with or raise your own kids, or and while what I wrote was specifically for African American kids, yeah, I think in the same, just any kid, how do we work with them, parent them in the context that we're in, when the extraordinarily egregious racial trauma is, and they're not sheltered from it, right? It's in their living rooms. So, thank you.
We're not sheltered from it as adults. And so this sounds very idealistic, but we have got to put some differences aside and learn how to work together. We have got to continue to have these conversations. We have got to battle it out and realize that we are all looking at different sides of the mountain simultaneously, right? I mean, the idea of racial trauma doesn't just affect Black communities, and I have to put that out there. But the way in which it affects Black families and families of color is significantly and historically different than that of our white counterparts, and we need to acknowledge that. And by we, I mean the collective we. Right. So it starts by having good leadership and good, good boundaries and good conversation amongst us as adults. We are the ones who are helping to pave the way for our youth. And so if we don't have it together, I can't even imagine, just the difficulties that they will have. I'll tell you, I grew up in a household where I had my mother and my father from two culturally different backgrounds, both collectivistic, but had very different cultural traditions. And they made it, a point to make sure that I was very well aware of the differences between those cultural traditions and the dominant culture, but not in a manner that said, that our culture is better or theirs is better, but just to point out that there are differences and that the world doesn't always accept differences in the same way. And so they had these very difficult conversations with me as a small child. And I think parents need to just get off of their high horses and have those conversations and realize that, it can be very fruitful and helpful that children are learning from, their predecessors. And we need to instill, African-American studies and studies about, BIPOC, people of color in the classroom. Again, we need to learn about the history of where we are from as a nation, as a people, and not just, cut certain things out simply because we feel uncomfortable.
I love that, Dr. Max. There's one thing though that is popping up for me, and when I hear the word racial or racism and racial trauma, I think that families of color, people of color, when they experience racism, they don't necessarily see it as like trauma. They see it as like, oh, that's Tuesday. Okay, great. Like, you know what I mean? And so I think that like, as I put like my clinician hat on and like how I see families and even my own family, right? Like we never really talked about trauma. I mean, there was tons of trauma in my family, but when it came to racism, that wasn't, I remember we went on we lived in an affluent part of the state in Connecticut, and sometimes we would go out for our Sunday like drives and stuff like that and just go see other houses and things like that and just spend time as a family with my dad. And I remember us getting pulled over, and the only reason why we got pulled over is because we were this Black family, these brown faces in a van, just go in the town that we lived in, right? And that was like shook me, and we didn't talk about that, right? Around like, oh, this happened, my dad got really angry. my dad's an immigrant, so he really, really, really believes in like the United States and necessarily will not say something negative, but like he was very angry, but we never talked about like the trauma that is inflicted on, you know, a family of color when this kind of stuff happens. So I think that like my first and foremost thing is that like when I talk about racial stress, I do equate it to trauma. Trauma that's both this lived experience and like, as we all alluded earlier, generational trauma, right? That like, you know, this person's mom or that person's dad went through this particular thing and then they couldn't, like my mom. I remember when she was younger, going from Boston down to Houston to see her dad, she said that at a certain point around like, you know, Delaware, Maryland, she had to switch to go in the back of the bus, right? And I'm like, well, I didn't even think about that later to understand like the ramifications of what that's like. And I became angry for my mom that she would have to go through something like that, right? So I think that like just talking about it and labeling it as that is trauma, and knowing that like that has an impact on families of color, but it also has an impact on everyone, right? And that we all live in this nation together. And if we are unable to meet that public health issue of racism, then like we all suffer in a particular way.
Thank you.
Wow.
Go ahead.
I just want to just add I don't shy away from age appropriate conversations to talk about racism with my kids. My oldest is 24 and my youngest is 20 months. So I'm always having conversations just on what they see. I mean, they're on the TikToks and stuff, and they're doing the Facebooks and the Insta hats or whatever. They're doing the things, and so I have to be aware of what's social media. That's more my concern is what they're picking up from social media, so we can have those conversations and unpack that stuff for those that are on the social medias. And then for my other girls, I just meet them where they're at. I answer if they're old enough to answer the question, like sex. If you ask the question, let's have the conversation. And that's kind of how I do it. I both my parents are civil rights activists, so they spared no expense at every single time finding opportunities to talk to me about that coming up as a young person. So have the conversation.
Thanks, Ahmad. Ashley, I see you had a question there, and it sounds like Ahmad was jumping on that one already. Is there something else you'd like to add?
Yeah, so Ahmad, earlier, I've heard you mention this in class before, the code switching. And I was wondering, as a parent, it seems like you have to balance between your like protective mechanisms with the code switching versus like being your authentic self and teaching your children to be their authentic self. So how do you talk to them about that when you're advocating for them, and how like when you're in your professional place, you said you know you switch codes, and versus like when you're with them?
Great question. There's the professional Ahmad and there's dad. So when dad comes home, dad is going to be dad. And so you know what you're going to get with dad. But when we talk about being professional, and when it's age appropriate, it could be for my 5-year-old, about how we handle ourselves at a restaurant if we're out in public. You know, that's kind of the examples. Like say, hey, when we're at the restaurant, we're not going to be screaming and throwing the stuff, right? No, I'm going to be good. That's the kind of stuff. That's how I kind of frame it. It's when I go to certain places, we're at a restaurant, we're going to have restaurant manners, and you're not going to throw food at your sister, right? Right. That's kind of how, you know, but they just know me as dad. So I don't really have to kind of, well, I take that back. My oldest ones, my 20-year-old, my 18-year-old, they get it because they have to do that too in their spaces. My 18-year-old starting at Seattle U, and she's already said, Dad, I just can't be me. And she's still trying to find her ways to articulate that. And I just stand there and let her find her words and just kind of support her on finding herself as an identity as a young Black woman, let alone going to college. I have no idea what that's like as a young Black woman. But I know what it's like to feel different. So I just meet my kids where they're at, meet their needs. And that's kind of that's been my parenting style. If they have a problem, let's talk about it. If you can formulate the words and think to ask it, it's my responsibility to answer it as best I can.
You know, I actually want to piggyback on that because an interesting tenet is, you know, Sarah Beth, thank you for our introductions in the beginning. One thing is I work in law enforcement now, right? So it's a little bit, it almost seems counterintuitive being a Black person working in law enforcement, and I use a lot of code switching there. You have to A, know your audience, but B, one thing that I like to say is, it's okay to be Black and it's okay to be different. And whatever that means on any given day is fine. And so I have my moments where, I will say things that are very stereotypically Black. And then there are things that are, that sound a lot more professional. And the thing about that too is, even when you do code switch, it doesn't guarantee that it will bring about the results that you're looking for, because you might have a twang, you might have a certain type of accent, which makes what you were saying not sound as professional as as someone from the dominant culture might want you to say. So I think the way that I've conceptualized it is, this gives me the opportunity, although it's very tiring and aggravating and exhausting, this gives me the opportunity to sort of play around with who I am and who you think I am on any given day. That there's a very professional side of me, the side of me that has this vernacular, the large vocabulary. And then there's a side of me that's very laid back, and it doesn't take away from my level of education what I'm able to say, the fact that I can be quick and quick-witted. But that all of these pieces encompass who I am, and it's not up for negotiation that one piece is, needs to be dominant over the other.
Thank you, Max. Sherry has a question for each of you three experts around working with children. Sherry? Oh, you're muted, Sherry.
After all these meetings, and I still do that, it is wonderful to listen to the three of you hold your conversation. Thank you so much for being with us. And I do have questions, Ahmad, and for Max, the two of you. I'm wondering what you are learning from your children. And then Anthony, the same thing. What are you learning from children who you know about friendships with children that they have with children of any race and ethnicity?
For the sake of brevity, I'll be very quick. I'm actually learning that friendships have conditions in this time, especially when it comes to race. And at the same time, there is the ability to work together and accomplish, a common agenda. But there are racial wars that exist in and out of the classroom. And it's heartbreaking because I experienced that. I experienced that in the workplace. And that's not something that I would have wanted for my children. And at the same time, I don't exactly know how to fully protect them from that.
Oh.
Thank you, Dr. Max. To follow, my girls are teaching me unbelievable amounts of love. My younger ones, because they don't know any better. They haven't been broken in yet as far as the world, how mean it can be yet. So to see my 5-year-olds and my 20-month-old and even my 12-year-old just embrace people, and they treat people as they are, and they know when you're being nasty, and they will check you. they will let you know. So that's really refreshing to know that my girls' hearts are still filled with love. But now I'm questioning as a parent. I'm like, okay, when do I break reality into them? When do I start doing that? Is that middle school? I don't know. Should I let them experience and develop their own friendships? Because all my girls we have kids all the time, they look different, all of them. And they don't know any different. They haven't been taught that stuff yet. So it's kind of beautiful just to see kids of different colors sitting there watching movies, eating popcorn together and doing what kids should be doing, And so I'm constantly questioning myself, when do I infer reality? When does it enter? And I guess I have to do it case by case. And that's what my teenagers and my adult daughter have kind of brought to the forefront. And we have those conversations. Hope that answers your question.
Oh, yes.
I like that, Ahmad. I like that, Dr. Max. I would say it's do what humans should be doing, because a lot of the younger kids that are like 6, 7 that I see, like they're connected to like everybody, right? And it's about play, and like the reason why they don't get along is because like you cheated or like you're playing fair, right? Like not because like you have puffy hair or you have different color eyes or different shape, like, you know what I mean? So it's not something that readily comes up. I will say that when the kids start turning around like 8, 9, 10 is really where you start seeing a little difference. And some of the things that I've heard and that have come up in session and that they've been teaching me a little bit is that it's incredibly hurtful when they get comments around like, how come your hair isn't like mine? Can I touch yours, right? And that's when it starts, right? Or they say, or you can't do this because you don't look like us, right? Or that like your mom couldn't be your mom because they don't have the same skin color, right? And so there's a lot of what they're teaching is that the intolerance is starting to happen sooner, which is really distressing, which means that a lot of families are not having conversations at home around like differences, right? And that differences don't mean bad. It just means that they were different. So that's what's something I would say that I've been learning from the kids that I see.
Thank you, Anthony. Jacqueline Rose has a question for you three, for the group. Jacqueline?
Sorry, I was typing. I've been trying to post on Facebook information and books suggestions for friends. And so I just wanted to get your suggestion that I have friends that are asking, you know, how do I keep, they're not racist and they're obviously not ethnic, and they're just trying to figure out how to navigate the conversation with their own children. And they do want to start early. So I just wonder if you had any more suggestions of things that they can do or verbiage that they can use or any type of information that would be helpful.
So as you said that, I went over to my bookshelf. This is a really awesome one. The Racial Healing.
That's cool.
Yeah. I actually started filling it out myself, and it really walks you through like challenging privilege and having those kinds of conversations and looking inward. And I know it's a little tough. It can be a little bit tough in terms of working with smaller children, but the nice part about it is there are nice little prompts in here that can be great conversation starters for families and children. So that I'm sold by this one. It's by Annalise Singh. And so there's a foreword by Tim Wise and afterward by Daryl Dwayne Sue. And we know about Sue and Sue, who talks a lot about the racial inequity. So the Racial Healing Handbook.
I know my wife and I together, we've been reading How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. And that's something that we've been doing the audiobook as we're driving along and doing our thing. And my wife really wanted to build more awareness, just so when she can call things out, if I'm not around, she can call things out and nail it, you know? So that's the work that she's been doing. We've been talking a lot about just what that represents, what that means for her. And just real quick to go back to, if we could touch base on trauma, I think trauma is an equal opportunity employer. Of course, racial trauma is specifically unique, but we all can identify what trauma is. I've been using it as opportunity to have conversations with people in dominant culture who don't look like me. And that's one segue that I've been able to connect with people is through trauma. We all know what it feels like to not feel good about ourselves, or people make us feel less than for whatever we are. And that's how I've been finding ways to have conversations around these topics, is start with trauma. Let's talk about your trauma. Let me help you understand, which hopefully, if I understand your trauma, I can explain my trauma in a way to where you can make connections by yourself. And so that's something that I've been trying out, and so far, knock on wood, it's been all right.
Thank you, Ahmad. Isardia, you have a question for our panelists?
Yes, I feel like you all might have indirectly answered this question, but it's a little selfish of me. But as a person of mixed background, of European descent and West African descent, and I'm a grad student in the CMHC program, art therapy. So I've been doing a lot of thinking on my own and research on complex identities. And I'm wondering how there's been a lot of focus on Blackness and like the color of your children and being proud of that and how you handle that in your day to day. But I'm wondering, how are you maybe addressing or thinking about some of the internalized oppression and maybe some of the self-hate for your children being of European descent, especially in the climate that we're in right now, if that applies to you?
That's a great question.
Yeah,
It's deep. That's a whew. Go ahead on with your best self.
Yeah.
So this is how I'm going to frame this. I want my children to be proud of who they are. And that's a culmination of mom and dad. And you're the best of us. You know, you're the best of us. And so I want you to be aware of your history. Dad's doing all the ancestry tests and doing all the things. So you have an understanding, specifically medically, if something happens, you know where your DNA and stuff is at and what's going on there. But our identity we build as a family. And I just need you to represent yourself with honor and dignity in everything that you do, period. My name is Ahmad Bennett. It means most honorable, highly praiseworthy, and righteous. That name was intentional. All my daughters have an intentional name. Live up to your name. Be your best self. And in whatever culture you identify with at that particular moment, embrace it. Because you're a mix of a lot of different things. And everything brings something awesome. And I want you to embrace that culture. I want you to embrace your European culture. I want you to embrace your Caribbean and African and Native American culture. Because my DNA and my wife's DNA, when you mix it up, man, we are a hot mess of American awesomeness, of just genetic diversity. And so I don't know how you frame, how you identify with. I just know in this house, we're going to raise you to treat people as they come and be honorable. I want you to be culturally aware of your Black identity. I want you to know your history. So you know when you're getting screwed, you can call it out, and you got receipts. You can show up with receipts. And so that's all I want you to do, is be prepared to show up with receipts when you need to. When something's not right, you say, oh, nope, I got a receipt for that. And we're going to talk about that, because you know. But who you are is just who you are. Be your best self.
That's so important that you like that. I didn't have this conversation growing up, and it's not, I didn't hear that, and I didn't get that, and that you have mixed children and that's the support that you're raising them with will make a huge difference in how they understand who they are and their identity. And I think that's extremely important for children who are of mixed heritage to be confident and solid in who they are. So thank you.
You know, I want to say I absolutely love that response, and this question also just kind of, it breaks my heart a little, because it really does speak to that dichotomous thinking we have here, that, you know, in many ways, Black love or loving yourself as a person of color somewhat, you know, there's this automated response to, you know, hate that European side or that white side, and you know, I don't believe that to be the case. I stand with Ahmad. You know your history, know where you come from, know that when you show up in the room, you're going to be seen as different. Or, you know, people are going to interact with you very differently. But this is not a situation where it's, you know, because of the atrocities that, you know, this one part of your background has endured, it means that you need to go out and have this agenda for full-on hatred of self and hatred of, you know, the other aspect of your whiteness, not to hate your whiteness. And that is a really important question, you know, that we address, that we teach our children to love both sides, that we are coming to the table trying to bring our children, you know, the best of us, that they are the best of us. And I think What it means, though, is we need to continue to have this open dialogue about how difficult it is to be multiracial in this country, even though, there are many people that take pride in that. It's also something that's very difficult to navigate because we live in boxes, unfortunately, and people like to things to be clear and cut and understandable. And oftentimes that is not who we are as people.
Just really briefly, I love both your responses, Ahmad and Dr. Max. I agree with that. And it's a really good question that I think that we've just, as a society, started to even know that exists, right? But I agree that I think that, like, when I think about like my last name is Welsh, right? Which is one of the like parts of my identity that's been passed down, racial identity has been passed down. And I love it. I love it. And I know what it represents. I know how it happened, right? I know that like somehow, somewhere that, there was a rape that happened within a community in Jamaica someplace that resulted in some of my ancestors being born. And I have that name with pride because that's a part of me. And the parts that I like really struggle with, like, well, is it wrong to do this, or is it wrong to align with this, or is it not right to do this? To me, I think that that's more of the world trying to play by the world's rules, and I can't do that. I have to do what's good for me and love myself in a particular way that lifts me up. And if anything, I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. At this time, we're just a little bit over our usual time to let people go if they need to, but we will continue this messy conversation for a little bit longer if you'd like to stay. I just want to offer now is the time if you have to go. Thank you so much for what you have just shared. I think for listening to your incredible experience, I'm struck by how much you might be carrying and coming to school and doing your hard work at school, and how we can think about the importance of this issue of racism in the parenting context is also important to our work with each other and how we're thinking about making people feel more included, making voices heard more. I think of my work with families and how what you see on the parent's face is going to affect the kid no matter what. And the weight that the parent is carrying is going to come to the house at the end of the day. And so I think a lot about in our school environment, supports that are needed to change the way that we have conversations, as you've all suggested, that are more honest and more opening, and bringing ourselves and our entire identities to our workplace as educators and as students. I'm curious what you think about the professional crossover of these issues as you've been discussing today, and how that plays out with students or with the people that you're working for or with as customers or clients.
I would just add that, when you're coming to Antioch and you're doing coursework in Antioch, for my undergrad and for my master's, I think there's one thing that's always been very true. You're going to have to be vulnerable to do some of this coursework, especially at the master's level. You got to get uncomfortable, because if you're going to ask your client as a clinician to do some uncomfortable work, well, you better make sure that you're doing that same work yourself. And so that's what this master's program has done for me. It's forced me to get uncomfortable, to be vulnerable. Now, being vulnerable as a Black man is not my go-to. Being vulnerable as a Black man, where I am the only 9 times out of 10, either the only male or the only Black male in my class, I got to do some stuff up here so I can receive that education, so I can keep it pushing. You know what I mean? Because I have an end goal, and I'm mission oriented. That's the structuralist in me. I like to kind of have things broken down like fractions when I approach things. And so for me, I have to be vulnerable to get to receive this coursework in its entirety and ethically. That also means I got to do a lot of work just to come to school. And so as professionals, as teachers and professors and facilitators, just be aware if you're LGBTQ plus, that you got to bring stuff to be vulnerable. If you're a person of color, you got to bring stuff to be vulnerable. And as a Black man, I got to bring stuff to be vulnerable to learn in this environment. Be cognizant of that. Be aware of that. Make sure we're checking on people when they're getting triggered. I love reading body language because your body will tell everything your mouth won't for me. And so I can tell when a clinician is afraid to talk about race, or when a teacher's afraid to talk about race, they kind of look at me like, is everything okay? I know that makes you uncomfortable, and that's cool. Let's just be honest with that. And let's just, if we're going to learn and do this work, and if we're going to take the time to pay the parking on campus, if I'm going to pay this kind of money and have to come down here every 2-3 times a week, then I expect you to be uncomfortable and vulnerable with me. And that's this kind of my expectation as an instructor. We all need to get uncomfortable if we're going to sit here for 3.5 hours, several times a night to do this work. Well, don't come half-assed. Let's do it.
Thank you, Ahmad.
It's interesting. One of the wonderful things about being part of the Antioch family is I had some great advice when I started my program at Antioch. One of my Black professors said to me, whenever you walk into that space, you bring all of you with you. And yes, I agree with you. You have to process what that looks like, what that feels like. And, short of the code switching, which might be necessary in some aspects, you don't make any apologies for who you are. But you stand and you sit in that space and you revolve with all of who you are. So when I approach my coursework, I write in that light. I express myself in that right, because I don't just have African-American, Black African blood in my veins, but I have Euro blood in my veins. I have an indigenous people's blood in my veins. So I bring all of that to my perspection. And I'm grateful that I got that advice when I started at Antioch.
I want to just respond as a professor at Antioch. And this is kind of to the question that Jacqueline is saying too. Well, at Antioch Seattle, I'm like one of a few faculty of color, which I wear that very proudly. I like that. I'm okay with that for now. But one thing that I think that it's important, and it's my ethical responsibility to teach clinicians who know how to encounter the whole self, right? Themselves and who they will see, right? It is really important for us to know that we have limitations on things. I say this all the time when I teach a multicultural class. When I'm going to teach around feminism or the lived experience of a cisgender or transgender woman, I am not going to be the expertise in the room at that particular moment at all. I will lean on my colleagues to be able to talk about that. And I specifically state that because I think that it's important to understand your limitations. It's important to understand how much you can do and what you can't do, right? And what might happen if you actually exert out privilege, because as a cis male, I have privilege to a particular point, right? It gets capped off as being a presenting Black male, but I still have privilege. And so what I want to do is be able to mirror responsibility, being a responsible, ethical clinician to my students. The other part is I use this book. I love this book, Teaching to Transgress, Education as the Practice of Freedom. It's by Bell Hooks. It is a wonderful text that talks about how to create an environment in the classroom that really meets and educates the entire individual in front of you, right? Mind, body, and spirit, right? And it's really, really, really important for me that students understand, number one, that they come there to learn, and I will be in there with that process, helping them to learn. And if you don't learn, I'm going to do what I need to do to make sure that you can learn, which includes perhaps the use of video, the use of different technology. It can't be just all written word, right? Or even if we're using specific things like research, that the scholarly journals, right, that can be heralded as something that is important, but other sources that have important places and stories to tell can be incorporated in what the assignments are and how I teach, right? It's really, really important for me to bend the curriculum to meet the students' needs. That includes talking about race. That includes talking about sexism. That includes talking about LGBT or sexuality or gender fluidity or any of these particular things. It's my responsibility as a professor to encourage these conversations and to mirror that. And as Ahmad mentioned around body language, students are real quick to figure out and see that, like, oh, my teacher doesn't want to go there. And this is the best thing. I'll make a mistake and I'll say, I'm sorry, I did that. I did it last week in class where someone was like, well, what about that? And I said, no, it's not. And then I went back and go, you know what? I messed up, right? It's really, really, really important for you to just humanize yourselves, right? As a professor, that way students really are able to approach you and challenge you, because I think it's appropriate.
I'm right there with you. You know, I don't want to speak too long, but what I will say is that last piece of allowing that space for your students to challenge you. I think that there has to be reciprocity in that learning environment. So what I try to do is I at least try to create these safe learning spaces for us to have this discussion. And I know that I am not the expert in all things. All right. I learn a lot from my students. I learn a lot about their experiences, and I incorporate that into how they learn. What their needs are in any given moment. And so we will, you know, bend and twist and move the agenda and move the syllabus in a manner that is reflective of what the need is in that given time. So when it comes to race, when it comes to sexism, when it comes to ageism, when it comes to things of that nature, we will have those discussions because those are important and relevant in what we are learning, whether it's about assessment measurements and whether it's about ethics, whether it's about, you know, family structures. These things are pertinent. These things are extremely crucial. And it is my job. It is our jobs as professors, you know, to uphold the social justice mission and to also, you know, create spaces for these conversations when students might not otherwise get that opportunity.
Thank you, Max. Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask our panel? Any comments? Ashley.
Question. This is for all of you. I've heard this term in classes before, more specifically in my counseling African Americans class. My professor had previously talked about clients who don't embrace their Blackness, you know, specifically when they don't see themselves as Black or a person of color, even though they are. I'm just wondering, as a parent and as a clinician and as more as a parent and a clinician, how you would address don't see that in themselves.
You know, I like to come from a place of inquiry. I think sometimes too, we see things that others don't see and vice versa. And this is hard for me to respond to. I think about like Rachel Dolezal, right? Everyone should know about Rachel Dolezal and the NAACP chapter out here in Washington, and how she professed herself as a Black person when, you know, she had European heritage, and that's what she subscribed to. I think that there might be a lot going on for an individual in terms of trauma or otherwise that needs to be worked through before they can really see themselves in a manner that society sees them. So I try not to push that too far. For some people, it could just be too much, too traumatic. You know, the other thing is, if you've never watched the movie Imitation of Life, watch that. It talks about, you know, we've retired this term, but a mulatto female, you know, who was unable to see herself as Black, even though her mother was, you know, very outwardly pigmented. And it wasn't until her mother's funeral that she was able to come to grips with her own Blackness. And I say, some folks really need the opportunity and time to really work through some of those those barriers of seeing themselves in that light and appreciating their cultural heritage. And for others, I think there might be something else going on. So I tread lightly with that one, because what I also don't want to do is force a person into a hole that they're not ready to be forced into or ready to commit to.
I agree with Dr. Max real quick. It's like, that's like the story of like my family on my dad's side. And part of that is it's not safe, and there's trauma that's involved there. And so you have to just take your time based on how the client is presenting or the family's presenting around what's happening for them. But it's a safety issue, right? And it's a assimilation issue, specifically for immigrants, right? Of color, specifically Black immigrants of color, right? That it is about surviving, and they made a choice perhaps to be here for that particular reason, and race comes second for them.
I'm a beginning clinician, so I don't have a comment yet. I've still got my training wheels on in that respect.
Ahmad, I know that you have utilized these strategies that they're both talking about in your work already, and I've heard some stories from you, so I appreciate it. Anyone else want to add a comment or a question before we wrap for the day today? We started with intention, which I think is really powerful. And we talked about listening to people's stories and addressing mistakes and taking your time. And I feel like these are invaluable strategies for us moving forward with these messy conversations and bringing them into our personal life and certainly our Antioch classrooms. And we appreciate all of you for taking the time to be here with us. And hope you'll see us again next Monday at the same time, at the same link. So grateful. Thank you.
I want to say thank you also
everyone.
to Ahmad and Anthony and Dr. Max for your wonderful conversation. I see it noted as a brilliant conversation. The intimacy of the conversation was exceptional, and that is one of the goals of the messy conversations, actually, is to be vulnerable and intimate as we talk through these topics. And you've exemplified the best of that. So thank you all for your participation today.
Ahmad, I just have to say, as the Uber for the Marine Corps, thank you for your service. I know Veterans Day is coming up, and my husband is the Marine.
Back at you, Devil Dog.
Amen.
Back at you. Thank you for your service. Welcome home, Devil Dog.
All right. You take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here.
Bye. Thank you. Please come back next Monday.
Beautiful.
Brilliant.
Thank
Fantastic.
Wow. Yeah.
So much.
Amazing job to all of you.
Are we still recording?
you. I'll turn it off.